Hi there YouTubers, welcome to another Northwind Homestead video. We're coming from the garage today and we're going to talk about worms. Worm composting and worm castings. So we use two systems out here. We use a Worm Factory 360 and we also have some DIY bins that we made just out of some tubs. I'll run through both of them real quick. And right now we're in the process of doing some harvesting. I've got a lot of castings built up. I haven't pulled any out in, it's been since the beginning of the winter. I haven't pulled any out, so I've got a lot of bins that are just completely decomposed, ready to get out in the garden and help our plants grow. So we'll start with the Worm Factory 360. This is a product that is a commercial bin, and we purchased this. Actually, it was a birthday present, one of the best birthday presents I've ever received. And this thing is great. It comes with multiple tiers. I've added some of these trays. We can pick them up. They're like 10 or 12 bucks at the garden store. So we could pick these up. It just makes it really easy because, as you add food to the bins, it composts low, and then you just pull that bottom bin out, you bring it up on top, you harvest the worms or feed the next bin, and the worms will go down into that lower bin. And then you could just start, I leave the top off when I harvest. And because the worms don't like sunlight, they don't like light, so that'll drive them down. And so I leave the top off. I just scrape off a little layer of the castings. I put it in my bucket, and then the worms drive down, and then I come back a couple hours later, scrape a little bit more, and drive them down further, scrape a little bit more, and then eventually that bin is empty. We have plans of making a harvester, and so basically it'll be a couple buckets with some hardware screen, and it'll rotate, and the castings will drop through, and the worms will roll down to the end of it and fall out the end. Something I've seen a couple of them on YouTube. Just one of those things. It's just another project that just keeps getting pushed back by the more important stuff. The cool thing about this Worm Factory is it does have the little spigot that comes with it, and so your worm tea will drain down through, and then it'll come out that little spigot. Lately, I've been just dumping it back into the bin because with the top open like it is to harvest the worms, I will get more evaporation out of the bin, and I'll lose some of that necessary moisture that the bin needs. So I've been recycling that worm tea back through just to keep everything below nice and healthy, nice and wet. And so yeah, it's our commercial side. I'll show you the DIY side. Okay, the DIY side is it's a little bit of a hot mess right now. Basically, I just went and got the Rubbermaid tin, drilled a whole bunch of holes in it to get air to flow through. And this was the bin I just harvested, so it's pretty cleaned out right now. And this one, I just did 4 big holes in the bottom, and I found that the castings that were coming out of this bin were more moist than I like them. So on the next version, I came through and I put a whole lot more holes in it to get a little bit more drainage out of it. And then all we've done, and this is pretty ghetto, so I just took another bin with some rocks in it. I wanted to get some PVC risers so it would be all the same height and get fancy with it, but I never did. I just did this and kind of ran with it, and that's how it's been for over a year. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And next to this, we have this again. I'm doing some harvesting right now, so I've just taken one of my trays from the Worm Factory and cut a hole in a piece of plywood, and I could set that on there and do the same thing with the light as I'm pulling the castings off, so I can work the 2 bins at the same time. I was taking the castings out of this bin, piling them in here, letting the light drive the worms down, and then as I was picking out big worms, I could just throw them into the bin below. And so I was just about to feed some of the worms, if you want to come along and see how that happens. Okay, so this is my commercial bin, the Worm Factory 360. And like I said, this is a harvesting bin, so it's a little bit wet because it did come out from down below. And what I'll do is I'll just scrape a little bit off the top. Yeah, so the adults will get driven down by the daylight. Usually when I find one, I'll just drop them over on the side so that they'll go down on their own. And then the little babies won't move as much. So little babies do get picked up in the castings sometimes. But that is the cost of doing business. If you don't get down fast enough, you go out in the garden. And if you go out in the garden in Alaska, you don't survive the winter. So that's my natural selection here for the worms. So what we're going to do, we're going to feed. I have a bin below this that's empty, so it's going to start my feeding bin, and that will also help concentrate the worms, because these guys will drive down to the food and the guys below will drive up, so there'll be less in the bottom bin when I go to feed. So I'll pull this bin out of the way here. And as you can see, got an empty bin. These worms need fiber. Besides food, they also need a fiber product. And so what I use for my fiber product is these egg crates. I get these a couple different sources. My main source is I get them from work. The boats that I work on, we go through dozens and dozens and dozens of eggs a week. And so I always get the cooks to set these aside for me. I bring them home and into the garden they'll go eventually. It's kind of crazy to me to think that someday we're going to be eating that, but that's pretty cool. So I'll run through the process of what I do with those. I've just got myself a bucket of warm water. Okay, bucket of water. Simply deposit the egg carton right in the water. It gets super soft really quick, and then just rip off chunks, and the chunks go into the worm bin. The cool thing about these egg cartons is it makes lots of little nooks and crannies, helps air stay into the bin. We want an aerobic decomposition, not an anaerobic decomposition. If the bin starts stinking really nasty and gross, you probably have not enough air in there. So at that point you want to mix your bin up pretty good, and then get some more fiber in there to create those air spaces to change that decomposition back to a aerobic versus anaerobic. And so I do about half and half. Sometimes 60-40 with the heavier side to the fiber. Then I do food. And a pound of worms can eat up to half a pound of food a day. So they can eat half their body weight in food a day. So when these bins are really healthy and they're going well, you can get them cranking out worms pretty fast. But we had a great idea. We started selling some of our worms at the market at our leather table. And they did really well, and people were buying them left and right, and we were happy, and we were selling and making money. And then all of a sudden, at one point, I realized I was selling too many, and I really hurt my stock. And I had to halt all sales in order to get my population back up for my own processes, for my own garden, my own composting. This product should be, they do the squeeze test, so when you squeeze it, you shouldn't really get water out of it. It should kind of just be like a damp. That might be a little too wet, but because my bin is going to be open, I'm going to go a little bit on the heavier of the wet side, because it will be open to the air for the harvesting process. So on the food, I have gone through different levels of preparing the food, and this is all just what it looks like. This is just our kitchen scraps, old sandwiches and vegetables. They love the watermelon. Oh man, do these things love the watermelon. I'll just break it up a little bit. I used to go through and I would freeze all of this stuff for a few days, because on all of these, everything we get up from the supermarket, there's all kinds of different there's all kinds of different bugs and stuff and eggs on these, especially when you get to your banana peels and things like that. Like, you bring up fruit flies like you wouldn't believe, and fungus gnats, and while these things aren't horrible to your bin, you can have all these things in your bin, because they're all going to help with the decomposition process. They're just kind of annoying to have in your bin, and they'll fly around your house, and you can freeze them freeze all these scraps for a couple of days, and that'll kill all that. But since I moved out in the garage here, and it's so buggy here to begin with, I just kind of gave up on that whole process and just started throwing food directly in here. And this will start to rot over the next couple of days and get a nice humid. And here, I don't want to pour all that water directly in. I will get as much of the junk out of there as I can. That looks pretty good. So I'll throw a little bit more fiber right on top. And then we'll put back that harvest bin. And we'll call this good to go. It's really cool. One of the things that I think is really cool about this is, like, we buy these organic bananas that come from Costa Rica, down on the equator, you know, down that way. And then I bring them up here. We eat the banana, which is delicious. And then we take the peels and we throw the peels in here. And that energy from the sun, that equatorial energy, gets broken down into these worms, and then they give me it back in castings, and then that same energy from the equator, that same tropical sun energy, then comes into my garden, and my plants get to soak some of it up. And to me, that's just absolutely fascinating. You can tell, you put it on the plants and they're just like, yeah, thank you. And this is what I've harvested out of the one DIY bin and one tray out of the commercial bin. And so I've got, like I said, it's probably about 2.5, maybe 3 gallons of castings. But this stuff is, there are still some babies in here. And I do feel bad because up here where we live in Alaska, earthworms are non-native. So I am introducing an invasive species by putting these little guys out there, but these red wigglers live within that top 18 inches of soil, and they can't survive the winter up here. It's just, this is too much. So some of the other worms and the night crawlers and things like that, they can live, and they've done some pretty big harm to the Alaskan environment here in some of the areas where they are introduced. Sometimes they get dumped out when they're fishing, and they'll around boat launches and stuff like that. They'll really eat a lot of the litter, the duff down in the forest. And they're not really good for the environment, but it is what it is. I'll drop that on top of there and take these castings out to the garden. Hey, kiddo, looking good. Witch costume. That's cool.
What are you doing?
I'm giving some compost to these little plants here.
Those baby worms in there?
Yeah, there are a couple baby worms in there.
A lot of them though.
Yeah.
Is there any big worms in there though?
No big ones. They got a little bit.